Dr. Fleck. It's week 2 of International Business for the summer, and this week's video assignment is on international trade. The Heckscher-Ohlin theory found in our textbook is an economic theory that states that countries should produce and export goods that they can produce efficiently and economically. Specifically, the countries that are planning on exporting a good should have an abundance of production factors needed to produce it, and they should have the ability to produce these efficiently. They should import the goods that they cannot produce so efficiently. This theory accounts for not only the commodities, but also the production factors that go into making them, like labor and capital. So the real-world example that I found was on the World Integrated Trade Solutions about the trading between the Netherlands and Germany in 2017 when they had an import-export partnership. So the Netherlands was able to export close to $506 million US and import $450 million US. So being able to keep that partnership so equal allowed the Netherlands to more efficiently and economically manufacture. Modern product lifecycle theory includes 3 phases: introduction, maturity, and standardization. The introduction phase includes a developed nation introducing a product into a market, and the demand starts to rise in the home country. The rising demand will cause the demand to rise in other developed nations, which will ultimately lead to the maturity phase, in which companies may choose to add manufacturing places in these new developed countries that are interested in the product. Lastly, the standardization phase is when the product is kind of standard across the developing nations and will start to move to the underdeveloped nations. When the demand starts to rise there, companies may opt to move their production there because they want to cut costs at this point. So a real-world example of this would be in 2016, Apple invested $44 million in a research and development facility in Indonesia. They decided to do this partly because their demand was declining in both China and the US, and they wanted to be able to broaden their scope and look into more ladder markets. Lastly, the absolute advantage theory by Adam Smith states that a country has absolute advantage in producing a good if it could do so more efficiently and economically than any other country producing it. It also states that a country should stick to producing goods that it has absolute advantage in and export them or trade them for the goods that they don't have absolute advantage in producing. When researching it, I could not find a real-world example because in the real world, not many countries have absolute advantage over one another because of modern industrialization. However, I was looking through my class notes for my economics class because we did talk about that in there. So an example that Dr. Olu gave us was if Canada could produce 100 pounds of beef using 2 ranchers, but Argentina needs 3 ranchers to produce 100 pounds of beef, then Canada has an absolute advantage over Argentina in beef production. This is because they could produce the same amount with less people. As I read in the article posted to Blackboard, it is clear that the difference in U.S. sugar prices compared to global ones is credited to subsidies and tariff programs that support U.S. sugar farmers. The program guarantees a great price for sugar producers while also limiting sugar imports from other nations. Leading U.S. companies have to buy U.S. sugar at inflated prices, which is causing them to make the switch from sugar to high fructose corn syrup. However, this switch could ultimately lead to U.S. citizens paying more for U.S. sugar. A company called the American Sugar Alliance has repeatedly backed the Department of Agriculture's program because it allows for a more manageable and reliable access to sugar. And in an article that I found on FEE about U.S. sugar prices, it made me aware of the fact that production of sugar in the U.S. is more costly than it is in other areas that produce sugar. This is because they have to compensate for the climate by injecting their land with chemicals that could stimulate the effects of production. The sugar program in our country, put into place by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is an example of fair trade within our country. The program limits sugar imports into the U.S., inevitably raising prices, causing U.S. citizens to pay double to triple the price of sugar imported from Brazil or India. So going back to the article I read on the website FEE, as of February 2019, we were consuming 57 pounds of sugar on average, which would equate to around $38. If we imported this sugar from Brazil or India, we'd be paying roughly $10. However, if you look at it in a broader scope and you consider all the things that I mentioned before with the climate and farmers injecting their lands with chemicals to stimulate production, you could just tell that this U.S. protection law is in place for a reason, and it's so that we don't have to put ourselves in a position where we're entering an international market because we don't have the land or the climate to sustain in that market.